Thank you very much for joining us. This will be the very first installment of a show hopefully you'll come to love. We call it the Joy.Book Club. My name is Benjamin Akakpo. I'm the host, and it's good to have you. We want to make books fun, reading books, dilating on them fun. And today, we have an interesting one we're about to get into. I love the title, The Boy Who Spat in Sargrenti's Eye by Manu Herbstein. He's South African, Ghanaian, or Ghanaian South African, whichever way you want to put it. And what's very interesting is that what he talks about in this book marks the 150th anniversary of the sacking of Asanteman. You would have heard that in recent times, some of those looted jewels of Asanteman had been loaned back. That's a story in itself. But without further ado, let me bring in the author himself. He's been gracious enough to join us today, Manu Herbstein. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Right. The Boy Who Spat in Sargrenti's Eye. I'm curious, why this title? And it's almost a fleeting statement in the book, and we don't see it again. Talk to us about this.
Look, the Sargrenti War was described in almost a dozen books written exclusively by the British who participated. There are no texts written by contemporary Ghanaians who were involved. And recently I watched on YouTube a 15-minute presentation by a British historian about the war. And it could have been, apart from the technology, it could have been presented in 1875. The mindset of the presenter is still set in the era of imperialism.
Wow.
Spitting in Sargrenti's eye is an action of rejection of the history as told by the imperialists and their descendants.
In other words, it's like finally the lion being able to write the story rather than the hunter always glorifying himself.
Sure.
Right. But what inspired you to write this historical, fictional piece? Because it is historical in a sense, but it is fictional as well. Kofi Jan and everything that happens. And like I mentioned, monumentally, it's been 150 years since that war. February 1874. And now we're in 2024, 150 years. What inspired you to put this together?
Well, I don't remember.
Honest answer.
I don't remember what got me started, so I've got to deal with this in retrospect.
Right.
But as I said, a lot of books written about the Sargrenti War, but none of them telling the story from the participants' point of view. So I felt there was a need. And young Ghanaians growing up really don't know their history.
Yeah.
So telling the story from the point of view of a fictional young Ghanaian who lived all those years ago and who's given a diary and asked by his godfather to write down what he sees, this seemed to me a good idea.
It was a brilliant idea, in fact, and today we're beneficiaries of that idea put together. Some of your works have won, apart from the glowing tributes paid to them. For example, Amma, A Story of the Atlantic Slave Trade, won the 2002 Commonwealth Writers' Prize for the first book. But this book itself, The Boy Who Spat in Sargrenti's Eye, has won other awards, including the Burt Award. Tell us about those.
Yes. There is based in the United States, there's an organization called the African Literature Organization, African Literature Association. This is an association of university scholars who teach African literature. And once a year, they award, amongst other prizes, one prize for a book of fiction written by a member. And I'm a member, and a few years ago, they awarded the prize for this book.
See, interesting dynamics. So, as my final question to you, when people read this book today, an event reflecting on 150 years ago, what do you want them to reimagine, think about people in Africa of African descent? What would you leave us with in that regard?
There's a custom in Ghana, pouring libation. This calls up the memory of the ancestors. I'd like people to think about the life of their ancestors, how they lived in these times.
Well, thank you so much, Manu, for doing us the honors. Thanks for gracing us with your presence, even as we review his book, The Boy Who Spat in Sargrenti's Eye. Oh, as for that boy, you'll be hearing from him shortly as we engage our guests. But thank you so much, Manu, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying with us. And of course, we continue right from where we left off, interacting with Manu Herbstein, author of this wonderful book, The Boy Who Spat in Sargrenti's Eye, taking us 150 years back in time. This is the Joy.Book Club. And let me quickly bring you my guests who join me for this review. Joining the conversation, we have Priscilla Adepa in the blue corner, and we have Ivana Ifua Eduse in the red corner. No boxing, though. Good to have you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Do tell us a bit about yourselves. I'll start with you, Ivana.
Okay, so like you said, I'm Ivana, and I'm a literature enthusiast, African literature specifically. You probably find my face buried in a book somewhere whenever you see me, always with a book, and yeah, that's just about me.
All right. Your typical bookworm. How about you?
Yes, another bookworm. I'm also a writer, researcher, and freelance editor, and I used to teach at the International University of Grand-Bassam in Côte d'Ivoire. Yes.
Okay. So you speak some French?
Un peu.
Un petit peu. All right. So we're about to get into it now. I would like to start from a little bit about the author and, of course, the blurb of the book. Who goes first?
I'll read the blurb of
Okay,
the book.
sure.
Okay. On 13th June 1873, British forces bombarded Elmina town and destroyed it. It was never rebuilt. Later that same year, using seaborne artillery, the British flattened 10 coastal towns and villages, including Axim, Takrady, and Sekondi. On 6th February 1874, after looting the Asanteheni's palace in Kumasi, British troops blew up the stone building and set the city on fire, razing it to the ground. 15-year-old Kofi Jan witnesses these events and records them in his diary. This novel, first published soon after the 140th anniversary of the sack of Kumasi, tells his story.
Now, that's interesting. If you're not curious already, you should be by now. Ivana, give us a little bit about the author.
Okay, so Ghanaian South African author Manu Herbstein has written 4 novels, including Ama, a story of the Atlantic slave trade, which won the 2002 Commonwealth Writers' Prize for the best first book.
And yes, he has other works that hopefully at some point we may get to review. But I'm now going to give you my literary fun fact for today. I'm going to do this every time we have this show. And here's what's interesting. Humble beginnings do not determine your end. And that clearly is the story of George R.R. Martin. You would remember him from A Song of Ice and Fire, adapted into Game of Thrones. Now, he grew up very humbly in the projects or the ghetto in New Jersey. He always wanted to travel, and his insatiable reading helped him to escape. Well, through his writing, he didn't only escape from the sort of life he was living before, he also escaped from poverty. So the message is simple. Just because you are small now doesn't mean you can't blow up. And you never know, like they say, small things or big things come in small packages. So that's my literary fun fact for you today. But let's get into this book. How exciting were you about this book, The Boy Who Spat in Sargrenti's Eye? For me, the title really got me like, hey, which boy was that brave enough to spit into Sir Garnet Wolseley's eye? How did you find this book?
So, very interesting. I mean, the title, like you said, very catchy. And I'm like, ooh, this boy has like the guts, very audacious, well written, well researched, very informative. I like the fact that, you know, it told the story of like Elmina a lot, because it's not something we really hear about a lot. Even in school, when you're learning government, history, whatever it is,
right,
you don't really hear about that. So I liked it. I mean, there are certain emotions you would feel. There's anger, sadness at points. Yeah, but all around, amazing book.
Something to learn. How about you?
Yes, I also appreciated the fact that it gave us an insight into the lived experiences of people from that time period. I don't think you come across...
Did you find yourself transposed into that period? Did
Yes.
you find yourself almost walking with Kofi Jan?
Yes, I think what also helped was the pictures, the images in the... Yes, I found that it almost read like a historical text, but it's obviously fiction, even though there are some true historical events in there. So that was also helpful to help us visualize that time period.
Let's talk about characters. Who would be your favorite character or characters, Yvonne?
Okay, Ababio.
Ababio.
Yeah.
Why?
So he was very smart. You know, if not for Ababio, the Asantes wouldn't have known a lot of things. So I feel that was like very smart of him at that point to let Kofi Jan's dad like talk to his mom and his grandpa for him to be Prior's assistant. And then, I mean, yeah.
Okay. For you, who would be your favorite character?
I think it has to be Kofi Jan as well. I mean,
Kofi Jan.
Yes,
right,
because we follow him throughout and we see how he matures and his observations of what the British are doing on the coast. So I think, it has to be Kofi Jan, yes.
All right. Let's talk about themes and writing style briefly. Definitely the themes are, but there are some very salient ones. I'll leave you guys to dilate on them. Where would you start with the themes?
Certainly there's the theme of colonialism, imperialism, because we have the situation where the Dutch were in control of Elmina, and then suddenly they hand over to the British. And how did that happen? The people of Elmina were not consulted. So you definitely have that theme of colonialism, imperialism, racism coming out, social injustices. So we have all of this here, and it's quite a lot to mull over.
Which other motifs
So I think we can look at religion, how religion was used as a tool in colonialism.
Manipulation.
Exactly, that's the word. So I think it's one of the salient themes. It's not something that will come to you initially, but then when you take time to ponder on the book, you'd realize that it's actually one of the salient themes in the book. Yeah, religion.
All right, let's start with some reading. I'll do the very first batch from pages 3 to 5, and the book has big lettering, so it's easy to segue from one page to the next one. Cape Coast, 25th December, 1895. This is literally Christmas. Do you know who Sargrenti was? That was the name I gave to Major General Sir Garnet Wolseley, KCMG, commander of the British Queen Victoria's army, which invaded Asante and sacked its capital, Kumasi, in 1874, 21 years ago. Here he is with his waxed mustache and his medals. As for me, I am Kofi Jan of Elmina. In 1874, I was still a boy, just 15 years old. It was I who gave Sargrenti his name, and it was I who spat in Sargrenti's eye. Yes, I was that boy who spat in Sargrenti's eye. This is my story. If you like it, sing my praises. If you don't like it, I challenge you to tell a better one. Before I start, I invite you to join me as I follow our time-hallowed custom and pour libation to our gods and to our ancestors. Odomankuma nsa, asase ya nsa, nsamampa nsa, yedamwase. Nananom, I greet you with this story. And in the end, he says, drink, drink, drink. No. How did you find the start to the book? Right from the start, libation is being offered. Kofi Jan introduces himself as some sort of narrator. I'll start with you, Priscilla.
I love that beginning because it's also taking us back to the fact that a lot of our traditions, storytelling, there's this oral aspect to it. It's not just written, and this is an ode to the stories of our ancestors. So it's fitting that you have this pouring of libation to the gods and to the ancestors, calling on the ancestors to witness this retelling and this witnessing of what happened in the past. It's quite appropriate. I loved it. Mm-hmm.
And right from there, we're taken to the shore where something is happening, pages 7 to 11. Maybe you could start reading a bit of page 7 into page 8, and then you can tell me what exactly is happening, Ivana.
Okay. Cape Coast, Saturday, 6th December 1873. I was on the beach with Yao. I go there when my schoolwork is finished, when there are no fishermen's nets to pull in. We swim and surf on wooden boards. Sometimes we draw a line in the sand and see who can jump the farthest. And sometimes we have a spitting contest with watermelon seeds. Yao usually wins the jumping, but I'm the champion spitter.
Okay, so we can pause there. I don't know, this guy, he's been spitting for a long time and he's celebrating spitting. No wonder he spat into something. But what is happening here?
So here, as a reader, you are visualizing Kofi Jan and Yao at the beach. And then, at the beach, there's obviously, you find boats, canoes, and he mentioned that they usually go when there are no fishermen's nets to pull. That means almost a bit empty. And then they do a contest where they spit out watermelon seeds to see who can spit the farthest. And then he usually wins that. So, yeah, in chapter 1, the very first paragraph, that is what is occurring to you when you pick up this book.
And when you go to chapter 2, specifically pages 15 to 16, I may not have us read because of the passage of time, but there are segments we'll read. You hear about Elmina New Year's Day, Kofi Jan and his diary handed to him by Uncle George. Tell us a bit about those characters, Uncle George, Kofi Jan, and this diary, which he ends up penning all of this in.
So, yes, Uncle George gives Kofi a diary and encourages him to record the events that are about to take place in their town and along the Gold Coast. And I remember Uncle George tells Kofi that these are momentous times, record these momentous events. So this is an important point in the novel because this is the beginning of Kofi starting to record his observations. And Uncle George himself is an interesting character because he's a merchant, and we learn later that he's an ally of the Dutch to begin with, and then the British. And actually, he falls out with Kofi's father and Kofi's uncle. Kofi's uncle happens to be the Ohing of Elmina. So Kofi is from a royal family. And he falls out with them because he becomes allied with the British, whom the Elmina people are trying to resist. So Uncle George here, it's fascinating that he's the one who hands Kofi the diary to record these events, while at the same time he's siding with the British who are coming to rule over the people of Elmina.
Right. In case you just joined us, so this is the Joy.Book Club, and we're reviewing a fascinating work, The Boy Who Spat in Sargrenti's Eye by Manu Herbstein, South African Ghanaian author. Fitting because it's 150 years since the sacking of Asante and the looting of the very treasures that have now been loaned back to Asanteman. But continuing from there, I'll read a little from page 21, but the main thrust of what I want is from 22 to 24. For a short time, there was peace again, but the British were jealous of Asante power and influence, and of Asante friendship and support from my uncle, Nana Kobina Jan, who had succeeded my grandfather as Ohen. Now, when we continue from page 22, Elmina was full of rumors, and so was Cape Coast. I overheard Nana telling my father that the British were so sure that Elmina Castle would fall into their hands that they thought they could give orders to the Dutch governor. He said that they were pressing the governor to send General Echampong back to Kumasi. I don't know if that was true or just another rumor. But then I'll skip to page 23. Governor Nachtglass suffered from a disease called gout, which made it painful for him to walk. He resigned in June 1871 and left at once for his home country. My father said he drank too much. We were not sorry to see him go. Before he left, he released General Echampong on condition that the general left for Kumasi within 30 days. When the month passed and the general was still in Elmina, the new governor, Hugenholtz, arrested him again. Then Hugenholtz also got sick and left. The next governor was called Rix. Arahin told him that the people of Elmina would never agree to accept the British. Rix too didn't last long. Neither did his successor, Lejeune. So you would realize that there's a trend. It's almost like, and you would see things like, we will not accept any other European flag there or anywhere in Elmina. These people's lives were being toyed with, almost as though they did not matter, Ivana. How did this portion make you feel?
So I think somewhere in the book, the Ohin actually says that they are being treated as slaves. And I mean, Elmina, people of Elmina, they are a nation on their own. And the book also makes you understand that before Elmina was sold to the British, it was a populous commercial town. There were like lots of trading activities going on. So the whole back and forth with the British and then Elmina, it makes me then wonder that what is actually going on? I mean, this is a nation of its own, and then they are being treated as though they are second class in their own nation. So, well, I did feel a bit angry at a point. I was angry because, I mean, you're in people's land and then you're dictating to them what they can and cannot do. So I was a bit angry when I was reading, this bit.
How do you feel about the theme of colonialist barbarism? Because some of the treatment meted out to blacks here, our ancestors, were mind-boggling. And you remember, for example, Lieutenant Just from page 37 going, and the Hausa soldiers, and how they were fixing the gallows, and because 3 people were going to get the snip. How did you feel about that?
It was upsetting reading those scenes, and also during the war and the treatment of the bearers and some of the people who worked for these soldiers. It was very upsetting, and those were the most difficult parts to read, actually, because it was really difficult to get through those parts.
How stark was it for you reading those lines? For example, if I may invite you to read from pages 50 to 51, Sanka, Saturday, 14th June, 1873. This morning.
This morning, it seemed that the fighting was over. The British allowed the Asante to collect their dead, provided they came without arms. Our Elmina men, also without arms, wandered amongst the smoldering ruins of our town, shaking their heads, struggling to make sense of it all. First, the British had arrested our Hing, and without even a show trial, exiled him to a far country. Then they had destroyed our town. The Dutch were gone. Our only friends, the Asante, had done their best to help us, but had been overcome in an unequal battle. We made our way to what remained of our house. My father was there, picking through the rubble, looking for any possessions of ours which might have survived and be worth salvaging. He said the British killed 200 Asante yesterday. From the ramparts of the castle, the soldiers watched, their rifles trained on us, ready to suppress any signs of trouble. But we had lost our taste for trouble. Should I go on?
Yes, till 51, I'll guide you to stop.
Okay. Kofi Papa, my mother said to my father, "What are we going to do? Where will we sleep tonight? What will our children eat?" "Kofi Mami," my father replied, "you must all go to your father in Cape Coast. There's nothing for us in Elmina." Sometimes this marriage between an Elmina man and a Cape Coast woman has seemed like a curse on us. But today, in this catastrophe, it is surely a blessing. How many in this town have this option? Come, let's go. I will take you there and then return to see what I can do to help here. As he said this...
Okay, so I think that summarizes it. And if we may add, a bit from page 60, I want to paint a certain picture about what is happening, because there were casualties on both sides. Eventually, when the British would wade into this and try to subdue Asante-Man, they would realize that while they had the upper hand, and at a point they would tell you that the arms they sold to the Asantes were rubbish, but they used the real deal. Let's go to page 60, Ivana, from the third paragraph, the Asante or Asante army, to the end. Page 60.
Page
So the
60.
Asante army.
Right. The Asante army suffered a serious defeat after the British bombarded Elmina on 13th June. There were 3,000 men in the force which came to our aid. From those, they lost 3 chiefs and 200 men died in the battle. The British had only 2 men killed and 7 wounded. It was the British guns which won the battle. The guns the Europeans sailed to as are rubbish. The Asante planned to use ladders to mount the walls of the castle, but they didn't manage to get close enough to put a single ladder in position. In the months afterwards, the Asante were struck down by disease, dysentery, and smallpox. In our farms, which used to produce enough to feed all Elmina and have some over to sell to the Dutch ships, could not sustain such a big army. The sickness and hunger spread to Cape Coast, even to Cape Coast Castle, but the British command the sea, so they could bring in supplies.
And so it continues to tell us about the inroads that the British were making now. But this whole complex, the Dutch and the British, how was it resolved in the end?
So in the end, the British sold Elmina. The Dutch sold Elmina to
The British.
The British, and then the Elmina people were resisting at a point. Some were actually in support, but then a majority of them were resisting. And then that is when their allies, the Asantes, came in, because they were there to protect the people of Elmina, and that is when the war at Abakrampa also happened. So I think in the end, the British left the shores of Elmina, and that was pretty much it. The Dutch.
The Dutch. I found something interesting, though. You know, sometimes they say if you're going to be attacked, it will depend on those around you being complicit or aiding, because there was infighting. Even in that area, the people of Cape Coast, the people of Elmina, and all of that. So you'd realize that when, I believe it was Sir Garnet Wolseley came through, there was a Durbar at some point later on, and the Fanti chiefs, some of the Fantis, would even make mention of the fact that, but these people from Elmina were siding with, you get it, they sold them out.
Yeah, that actually was quite an interesting aspect of the story for me. And before the show, I was talking to Manu Herbstein about this fact, about the fact that the people of Elmina really saw themselves as different from the Cape Coast people. They actually referred to the people from Cape Coast as the Fantis from Cape Coast. And I think this is an aspect of our history that many of us might not know. And this is one of the things that the book teaches us, aspects of our history that we might not even know. And yes, even when Elmina was destroyed and it was flattened, the people from Cape Coast came and started looting from their homes.
Yeah.
So
that's the whole point I'm making. Their very own brothers and sisters.
You would think, but I think the thing is they saw themselves as quite different they were from Elmina, and then they were from Cape Coast. And for some reason, they saw themselves as quite different instead of uniting and fighting against the Europeans, which was unfortunate.
And it was used against
exactly
them.
Yeah, divide and rule class.
So later we'll see about the arrival, the announcement in September of Sir Garnet Wolseley being assigned to be the administrator, and then he would arrive. I would read from pages 97 and 98 right before we take a bit of a break, very quickly. Cape Coast, Sunday, 14th December 1873. The British have brought a special machine on one of their ships. Yesterday, they promised to outdoor it. Some of the whites call it a traction engine. Others say its proper name is the steam sapper. Cape Coast people call it the land steamer, meaning it is like a steamship but can travel on land. They have a prisoner of war, an Asante man, whom they plan to send to Kumasi with a letter for the Asante Hene. They decided to give him a ride on the land steamer in the hope that when he gets to Kumasi, he will spread the news of the white man's powerful magic. A great crowd assembled to watch the show. The driver blew a whistle and everyone screamed. The steamer's wheels slowly started turning and the machine began to move. Unfortunately, it soon fell into a ditch. Volunteers pushed it back onto level ground and off it went again. After 2 miles, it reached a steep hill and halfway up came to a stop, spewing boiling water into the air. The result of that was that the engine was drenched and the fire put out. It was late into the night before they managed to repair it and send it back to the castle. It's standing there now in disgrace. We hear that it's going to be used to cut wooden planks. The messenger had to continue his journey to Kumasi on foot. I laughed when I got to this point because it was like, why guys are now? Literally, at Ton's room. That was what had happened. But from here, we'll start seeing about more of the attempts to fight Asante-Man, and we'll see about that Fanti Durbar. Any quick thoughts to share on that before we proceed from here? What then happens when Sir Garnet Wolseley is in town? What are the moves that are made, Priscilla?
Yeah, they really start preparing for war, right? And bringing the troops in, preparing for war. And we see that the British definitely had weapons that would have outclassed any weapons that the Asante have. So we start worrying about the outcome of this war that has been actually forced on the Asantes.
Any thoughts on that?
You know, at a point when I got to that part where they had started building bridges and then huts in most of the various towns leading to the Pra, I had to pick my phone, go on Google and like, who won the Sargrenti War? Because at that point I was scared because the British had lots of weapons. Although the Asantes were brave, they had courage and all that, they didn't have weapons that were going to match up to that of the British. So I really got worried at a point.
All right. So we're still here in the studio, Ivana, Priscilla. It's all about The Boy Who Spat in Sargrenti's Eye by Manu Herbstein. This is the Joy.Book Club. My name is Benjamin Akakpo. We'll be right back after the break with more. Do stay. Welcome back. This is the Joy.Book Club. This is where I take a pause and bring you my word in action for today. And it is ululate. And in this sense, it says ululated, right? So this word is spelled U-L-U-L-A-T-E-D. If it's the verbal form, it's just U-L-U-L-A-T-E. So what does it mean? It means to make a long, high cry with the mouth and tongue that changes between 2 or 3 notes, often to show emotion at a ceremony such as a wedding or funeral. If you don't know what it is, let me give you an example. It's kind of like, yeah, you may have heard that before, right? It's usually done in the African setting when something has gone wrong. And that's so if you've ever wondered, that action, what is it called? It's called ululation. And in this sense, the part of speech is the simple past. Here are some examples. By night, Bamako is a riot of noise as singers ululate at wedding parties. Or, another example, women in rainbow-hued native dresses ululated, a shrill cry that usually accompanies celebrations in this part of the world. Okay, so there we were. None of you is ululating. So we continue from where we left off. Now, the topic of objectification of women. And to some extent, male chauvinism comes to mind. And I'm going to read from pages 112 and 113. 112 to 113. Mr. Pryor went on as if he hadn't heard. He's one of the British, by the way. I don't want you fellows to misunderstand me. This is an aesthetic matter. I'm only sorry that my work restricts me to drawing in pencil. I would love to try to render the bright cloth these fancy women wear and their chocolate skin color. But I didn't bring any oil paint with me. Some of them are anything but ugly, don't you think? Take Essie, for example. The girl who brings us our food, isn't she quite beautiful in spite of her woolly hair, flat nose, and thick lips? You're right, said Mr. Stanley. I wouldn't mind getting my own fingers on her. They were talking about my sister, AC. I was shocked. I was surprised to hear that these white men might like our black girls. I wanted to go to the kitchen to warn AC to be careful. But just then, she came with 2 empty trays and told me to help her to take the dishes back to the kitchen. As we carried them across the road, she said, Hey, Kofi, I'm tired. There is just too much work, hairdressing, cooking, washing clothes and dishes. The sooner these white men leave, the better. I said, AC, there's something I must tell you. What? She asked. You must be careful. The new man, my employer, Mr. Pryor, he says he likes you. What? She said. Okay, so let me get that. What? She said, you must be crazy. The one that looks like a pig. And she sucked her teeth. And Mr. Stanley said, he wouldn't mind getting his fingers on you. Just now I heard him. Be careful, I tell you. She just shook her head as she put her tray down. You must have been dreaming, she said. I wonder what she really thinks. Girls like to be flattered and admired. I wonder whether I should tell Mama. She'd probably blame me for eavesdropping. And what could she do about it anyway? Give them a warning? This portion, it's both comical, funny, and also disturbing. What ran through your mind when you read that portion?
That racism is such a funny thing. You claim to dislike these people, you claim these people are inferior to you, but you cannot deny the beauty in these people. And this is why...
And even when they are describing the beauty, they will talk about thick lips,
exactly,
flat
woolly
nose
hair,
and stuff.
Yes. So you see that some kind of, I don't want to say humanism, but the truth is laid bare to them, that there is beauty in these people that you claim to be inferior, and you have to acknowledge it. That is the truth. But unfortunately, because of these racist ideals and that are so deeply rooted in them, they could not even bring themselves to acknowledge this truth, and they end up using such racist words to describe AC and the other women. Yes.
For you, Ivana, did it strike you in the same way?
Yeah, it did. I agree with Priscilla, because you call them lazy, you call them barbaric, and then you then put it in a subtle way to acknowledge that they're actually pretty women. So yeah, I agree with Priscilla.
And we do know, outside of the book, we have read stories, not just in on the farms in other parts of the world, the United States and others, but sometimes these very slaves, their slave drivers, the owners, so to speak, would take advantage of them all through the period of slavery. And sometimes, from some of the things I've read, they would want to give them a very good wash, sometimes even to the point where the skin, because they somehow felt they were dirty and all of that. It just points to a portion in history that we would want to forget, but which is also our reality. But let's now get to more of this story as we dig even deeper. Pages 135 to 136, or should I just go to 151? Let's go to 151. It talks about the shortage of food, and again, there's a story about someone stealing, if you recall, and the punishment that came with it. Just describe it for us, Ivana. What was it like? Barbaric.
So I think Pryor's chef had stolen food, and then Pryor was asked to whip him 36 lashes. But then, as coward as he was, he couldn't bring himself to do it. So another person had to do it. And then, although it was supposed to be 36, he went ahead to give him 42 lashes. And then the chef ran away and promised that they should be careful and that he's going to slit their throats should he lay his hands on them. So, yeah.
And here's what he says when the strokes are done. And this was what hit me. Then he says, let this be a lesson to all of you, he said, or he told us, wiping the sweat from his brow. If you want to avoid receiving some of the same medicine, behave yourselves. To his man, he said, now you, what is your name? Get down on your knees and kiss my boots. The man did as he was told, mumbling his repentance and apology. There was a murmur from the crowd. A woman cried, Mobo, to express her pity for the poor man. I'm sure that many others shared my anger at the way Mr. Stanley had humiliated him. Mr. Stanley's eyes were like a double-barreled gun firing at us. Now it was the turn of Kojokum. But Mr. Pryor couldn't bring himself to beat him, like you said. And in the end, they would start calling, and some would say, Kose, Kose. This human side of it, or the abuse of humanity, it really rubbed off on me raw, because, of course, you've read so many things in the past, but it still hits you every time. But I just wanted to ask, from your own personal experiences, are these things, do you feel the times have got any better in reality?
I think abuse can come in various forms. It can be physical, it can be emotional, but unfortunately, I don't think humanity has moved away from these abuse in general. And we do see it at various levels. I mean, this is something that was quite institutionalized in terms of the racism and in terms of the treatment that was meted out to the Africans by the Europeans. But I do think you do still see, even on the world stage, this imbalance of power. And they might not still be hitting us, but then they hit us in other ways, economically, and even maybe when you go to a meeting at a world, at an international stage. So I do think, unfortunately, even though maybe Europeans might not still be in Ghana or in other African countries ruling us directly, you still find this imbalance of power depending on where you look and how you look at it.
Okay, and that brings me to the next thing, because sometimes, because it's current, the LGBTQ situation, and I know there are people who stand on different ends. I stand on a specific end on the back of what the Bible says, but I also stand on the human end that people shouldn't be, we are all human. But when you look at this, it brings to mind precisely that. Some have said that, okay, so why don't these Western powers go to some other places, like in the Middle East, and go and say this to them? Because they are not, here we are not economically empowered. What do you think about that situation, reflecting this? It's still happening, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's a complex matter, isn't it?
It is, and it's something I want to move away from.
It's not something, Priscilla, is this something you'd like to touch on briefly?
I mean, I think what I said just now, that there are various ways in which, unfortunately, there's still some imbalance of power, and there's still someone dictating to you what you can do in your society, in your economy, etc. Unfortunately, until we stand up for ourselves, and I think that's actually one thing that I'd like to mention, and which I'm not sure we've mentioned so well, that another key theme of this book is actually resistance and standing up to social injustices. Because even after he's beating Kojokom, he's able to turn, on page 161, he's able to turn and scream and at Mr. Stanley, or rather Mr. Pryor, his boss, coward. So even after being beaten, even after being treated in this way, he turns back and he shouts, coward, in order to resist this form of treatment that he's been given. So I do think, unfortunately, the world we live in, there are lots of injustices, lots of power imbalance, but we need to find the courage as Africans, as people in general, no matter where you are, wherever you are, we need to pray for the courage to stand up and to resist and say, no, you're not going to treat me this way.
Yeah, and we all need to realize that everybody is human and no one is more human than the next person. But something that I meant to get to before now, how religion, like you mentioned, was used as a tool. There's this, what I call the sermon. When you go to page 121, you would see that now the chaplain spoke to the soldiers. And in fact, before that, he was talking about God is great, another miracle. The people of the city tried to run away, but God had told Joshua. He was citing the incident in Jericho. So here he says, now the chaplain spoke to the soldiers. He asked them to think of the parallels. Asante may not be a country flowing with milk and honey, but it certainly is flowing with gold. Kumasi, like Jericho, is a city inhabited by savage pagans. And they, the British soldiers, are the children of Israel of today. You men, he told them, have come to the Gold Coast to shed the light of civilization upon this vast and wealthy country. Think of yourselves as specially created and selected for this work, sent out as the instrument of divine providence, which overrules everything to show the glory of God and to promote the good of mankind. Or better still, show the barbarism, wickedness of mankind. Then the story ends with the war. Kofi Jan talks about the carnage, page 199 following. But to conclude, how does this story end and what happens to Kofi Jan, Priscilla?
Kofi Jan, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but he does follow sort of the British invade. They're heading towards Asante Man, to go and invade the Asantes and teach them a lesson and subjugate them and show them that the British Empire is going to rule over them. So Kofi Jan has this opportunity to follow the troops towards Kumasi, and he gets to witness, unfortunately, the destruction and the invasion of Kumasi and the looting of Kumasi. And this shapes him in profound ways, and by the end we see him again trying to speak up against this injustice, which I found again quite important. That by the end, almost when all of this is happening, the war is happening, he's in shock. He keeps hearing noise and noise, but by
like
the end,
some out-of-body experience.
Exactly, that he cannot believe this is happening. But by the end, he finds the courage to speak up and to spit into Sargrenti's eye.
Yeah, I like that bit. To go ahead and spit.
Exactly.
He says he's a master spitter.
Yeah.
He has a PhD in spitting.
He's a champion spitter.
For you, I mean, getting to the end of the book, and of course, we also want you to go and grab a copy of the book and read it for yourself. In a review like this, we can't give you everything. So go grab a copy of the book, The Boy Who Spat in Sargrenti's Eye by Manu Herbstein. You can get it in many bookshops. But for you, how did you find the ending? And in Kofi Jan's shoes, how do you think you would have felt?
In his shoes, I'd have probably been a coward. And just stood there to stand there to watch them auction the goods they looted in Kumasi. And that makes me think that Kofi was really courageous and audacious to actually do that. He was thrown into cell, and then his grandpa and his mom had to go and beg before he was released. Yeah, pretty much it.
Okay. So I'll end then before I get into the very last part. What lessons are you taking away from this book? I'll come back to you, Ivana, first.
Okay, so what I actually learned it at the very last part, the author's forward. And it's something I'd already realized, is that a lot of times when things happen, probably past in the colonial times and even right after independence, is that most of the events that happen are not written by us. It's always the European people. Because I remember back in school when we were learning politics of Ghana. I mean, we are learning politics of Ghana, but then the author of whatever textbook we are using or PDF we are using is Naomi Shazan. Definitely not Ghanaian. You just find just a few essays, articles written by Ghanaians. So I think moving forward, I think we've already started doing that, where we document a lot of events that actually happen, and that's something we should take very serious. And also we should teach history in our schools. Right. Very important. There are so many things in this book that I did government in school, a bit of history back in junior high school, but I didn't know a lot of things until I picked up this book. So after reading, I finished this book yesterday, and then I was just on Google. Now going to verify some of the events that actually did happen, and then realize that there's a lot of information out there, but then we are just restricted to certain parts of the history. Okay, so in 1874, there was a war, and that is it. So I think going on as a country, as individuals, we should read a lot about our history to appreciate it, and then look forward to the present and the future. Because, history is the future. That's it.
Great stuff. You?
The point I'd like to talk about is actually related to what Ivana said, and that is broadly the importance of storytelling and record keeping. This is a fictional diary, but it would be great to have been able to read something that was written by someone who lived during that period. And I think this is why this book is important, because it's providing an African perspective of that period, whereas a lot of the historical texts we have out there are actually written by Europeans. So even in this day, even in contemporary times, it's really important for Ghanaians, Africans, to really record and tell our stories. And it can be in any form. It doesn't necessarily have to be in written form. It can be through film, it can be through song, it can be through plays. There's so many ways in which we can tell our stories so that future generations can learn from our mistakes, but also learn the things we got right.
Well, thank you, guys. I'm going to wrap up with the last 3 bits in the final segments, and then we can say adieu and look forward to another. So within this last belt, you would always hear me give you 3 things: a reading quote, a figure of speech, and a poem tied to one of the themes in the books we're going to review. And my reading quote for you today comes to us from Jim Rohn. Don't worry, we'll get the Africans in there too. And he says, "Reading is essential for those who seek to rise above the ordinary." Reading is essential for those who seek to rise above the ordinary. Reading definitely has made me rise, so I don't know about you. They say the fewer the merrier, but I'd love it if you read and expanded your horizon. The figure of speech I'd like to share with you today is called categoria. It's not one of those very common ones. It's spelled like category, but instead of a Y, you have an IA at the end. And here's what it means. It is the direct description of another person's faults. Usually people would want to avoid that, right? You want to be nice. But here, you go straight for it and mention it. Here are some examples. You are lazy, careless, and unlikable. Why should I trust you? You are lazy, careless, and unlikable. Why should I trust you? The person is being blunt. Another example is, wrong again. Your arguments are always full of holes. Wrong again. Your arguments are always full of holes, which means for this person, he has written off this other person. So it expresses a bit of stereotyping in literature. But to conclude, I'm going to take a poem. I hope you get excited by it. I feel it reflects this book in a way. It's by Joy.Book, Voices in My Head, this collection. I'm going to read from page 27, and he has a poem titled Duality. It's a little long, but come along with me. We have the time for it. I stand at the center of a war that has been waged for hundreds of years. A war that has been fought with burning crosses and thick rope, with shackles, chains, and whips, with hidden looks and clutched handbags, with segregation and cultural destruction, with guns and warplanes, with bullets and bombs, with sharp tongues and the devil's eyes, with fake smiles and darkened hearts, with misunderstanding and deception, with hate and cruelty, with knives in the back, and hangmen with religion and courtrooms. I stand at the center of war that has been televised, commercially edited, digitally mastered, and broadcast in stereo. I stand at the center of a war where everything is black or white, yet I am the gray area between warring parties because I am neither black nor white, and yet I am both. I am neither African nor European, and yet I am both. I am your future, devoid of a side to pick. I am your hope, devoid of your understanding. I am your greatest fear, and I am your wildest aspiration. I am the merger of your strengths, and I am the failure of your weaknesses. I am a symbol of your love and a victim of your hatred. I am the unification of your desire to separate and separate from your desire to unify. I am a power unto myself and the product of your power. I am so much and yet represent so little. I exist in the midst of the confusion you birthed me into because I am the product of two factions stuck on extreme poles of reality. And that is the piece Duality by Joy.Book from his collection of poems, Voices in My Head. But today, we've been reviewing The Boy Who Spat in Sargrenti's Eye by Manu Herbstein. It's all over the bookshops. Go grab yourself a copy. It's not that expensive, actually. And oh, by the way, something I forgot. This mask here is one of the looted treasures, and it is all gold. All gold, and it was stolen. So let's get into the history. Ivana, Priscilla, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.
I look forward to the next time. And look forward to our next review on the Joy.Book Club. Next time, we're discussing Aisha Haruna Atez, The 100 Wells of Salaga, which also talks about slavery and some things in there. My name is Benjamin Akakpo. Thank you for watching.